The movie begins during a routine mission aboard the International Space Station, where a team of astronauts prepares to intercept an unmanned space probe, codenamed Pilgrim, carrying biological samples on its way to Earth after completing its 8-month Mars mission. Inside the capsule are soil samples that seemingly contain evidence of alien life. Discovering that the probe has veered off course, engineer Rory Adams is tasked with slowing it down so it can be docked safely into their orbit using a remote arm. Despite the crew's jitters, they carefully help Rory set up for the dangerous spacewalk operation. Within minutes, the Pilgrim shuttle crashes but gets caught by the arm, relieving the crew watching from the window. The following day, UK ISS exobiologist Hugh examines a speck of the soil sample, revealing a dormant cell resembling a hairy filament. Attempting to revive it, he pumps more carbon dioxide inside the biotank, akin to Earth's atmosphere during the Proterozoic era, and adds glucose as a growth medium. Somehow, the cell wriggles, showing signs of life, delighting the crew immensely. Some time later, after the colossal discovery of the living cell, the crew sets up a live feed for New York's Times Square as they answer questions from schoolchildren belonging to Calvin Coolidge Elementary School. The crew, including ISS Mission Commander Ekaterina Kat-Golovkina, CDC Quarantine Officer Dr. Miranda North, Medical Officer Dr. David Jordan, and Japanese ISS Systems Engineer Sho Murakami, introduce themselves, tour the children around the ship, and explain their daily routine. One of the kid representatives proudly names the newly found Martian species Calvin after their school's name. Later, during some downtime, Miranda checks with David about his rising muscle atrophy due to his extended stay confined to the station. David shares the devastating situations he witnessed as a soldier in Syria, expressing gratitude for being in space, far away from the hardships on Earth. Meanwhile, Hugh confides in Commander Kat about his longing to freely use his legs, having been wheelchair-bound since he was 10 years old. On day 12 of the mission aboard the ISS, Hugh continues experimenting on the Calvin specimen, discovering that the cells have evolved into a single unit that shares electrical neural activity. Miranda deduces that the entity comprises trillions of identical cooperative cells with sensory functions. Suddenly, Calvin grows proto-appendages, reaching out to Hugh's finger with its newly formed arms before swaying around. This discovery fascinates the entire crew. Later, while everyone is taking a break in the lounge, Sho is video chatting with his wife, Kazumi, who is in labor at the hospital. He tries to calm her down while she pushes their baby out under the doctor's orders. Not long after, he introduces his newborn baby, May, to the team. Commander Kat is so pleased that she gives him a book, Goodnight Moon, hoping he will read it to May sometime later. Hugh resumes his work with Calvin, which has learned to latch onto his finger. He soon becomes attached to the strange creature, treating it like a pet. On day 25, the crew responds to a heightened alert inside the lab, where the biotank clamp has malfunctioned. Rory manages to repair the issue quickly, owning up to his mistake. He and Miranda are understandably livid over the breach of protocol, insisting that Hugh strictly observe contamination procedures to avoid risking the specimen spreading around the space station. Not long after the incident, Miranda records her findings, noting that Calvin has stopped growing and entered hibernation. During a physical therapy session, Hugh shares his fascination with studying Calvin's molecular structure, hoping it will lead to developments in stem cell research and cures for incurable diseases. Later, he stimulates Calvin's senses by awakening the specimen with a mild shock, but it does not move. On his second attempt, however, Calvin suddenly grasps his gloved hand tightly, alarming the entire crew watching from outside the lab. Hugh struggles to break free, but Calvin's grip does not loosen. Enticed by the electric prod, the creature latches on, and despite Hugh being in obvious danger, Miranda remains resolute, sealing the lab and securing the firewall to prevent the creature from escaping. Hugh is helpless as he fails to slip out of the glove, writhing in pain under Calvin's crushing grip. To everyone's horror, Calvin lets go, leaving Hugh unconscious and floating inside the lab. Calvin then reaches for the prod and punctures a hole in the glove, breaking free. Ignoring protocol, Rory opens the door to pull Hugh out. However, David sees Calvin grab Rory's leg and is forced to close the door, trapping Rory inside. As they safely recover Hugh, realizing the imminent danger, Rory blasts Calvin with a blowtorch, managing to free himself. But the specimen escapes and roams around the lab. Fear intensifies throughout the station as Rory nervously tries to use the incinerator, but fails to subdue the crawling creature. To everyone's shock, Calvin enters Rory's mouth and devours his internal organs, killing him. The blowtorch then floats towards the sprinklers, triggering the fire suppression system. Calvin, now much larger than before, escapes from Rory's lifeless body and looks for a way out. Commander Cat and Sho attempt to manually override the system, while the CPU is in lockdown mode. Miranda watches as the creature slips inside an open vent after sensing the airflow through it. After recovering Rory's corpse, the crew discovers that their communication system, despite being independent of the sprinklers, has somehow shut down, preventing them from contacting Earth. Sho realizes the transmitter has failed and needs to be repaired from outside the station. Beset by urgency, Commander Cat volunteers to perform the spacewalk, despite the risks. Not long after, David helps her into her suit. She sets out to find the transmitter, identifying an overheating issue. Hugh deduces that Calvin has absorbed the coolant for sustenance. Suddenly, the creature latches onto Cat's suit, trying to find a way inside while squeezing her leg. David leaves the airlock to burn Calvin. To complicate the situation, the creature destroys Cat's coolant loop, scattering liquid inside her suit. With no other recourse, the commander untethers her harness and jumps toward the airlock while drowning inside her own suit. David hurriedly dons a spacesuit and meets Cat outside the airlock, asking her to open the valve. However, the commander sacrifices herself so that Calvin will stay outside of the space station. The crew helplessly watches as she drifts away, while the intelligent creature leaps and scurries elsewhere. As they grieve the loss of their beloved commander, they reorganize and plan to keep the creature away from the maneuvering thrusters by blasting it. Sho knows it will trigger the temperature sensors if it attempts to climb through one of the nozzles. They miss and see Calvin run toward the outside of the lab. Sho repeats the process of burning out the thrusters until the fuel gauge reaches a critical level, causing the station to face orbital decay and burn up upon re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. Though they manage to regain a safer orbit, it allows Calvin to re-enter the station. Hugh deduces that depriving the creature of air might cause it to lay dormant. He suggests they seal themselves inside the tranquility room and vent the rest of the station. While everyone seals the interior, later, David and the others share their feelings about the loss of their colleagues, comparing the tragedy to the Challenger explosion. Hugh states that Calvin is targeting them because they are its only means of survival, before slipping into unconsciousness. The team immediately uses a defibrillator to revive him with controlled shocks. However, as they do, Miranda sees movement inside Hugh's pant leg. She opens it, revealing that Calvin has latched onto his leg the entire time, feeding off him. Miranda attempts to shock the creature with a plasma cutter, only to provoke Calvin into attacking. The surviving astronauts race toward the exit hatches as Calvin chases them. Sho separates himself from David and Miranda to protect them, encasing himself in one of the sleeping pods. Calvin menacingly stares at him, attempting to break through the glass until it retreats. Meanwhile, David and Miranda return to a dying Hugh, who requests to be lifted one last time before succumbing to his injuries. Miranda notices her finger is wounded, not realizing that her blood is floating away. She and David find an opportunity to track Calvin, since it has swallowed Hugh's leg tracker. They ultimately use Hugh's corpse to lure it into a trap, sealing it in a room while venting the oxygen supply. As the creature slowly suffocates, David sees an approaching Soyuz spacecraft sent by headquarters after receiving a brief distress call from Commander Cat earlier. The pair tries to signal the craft with a flash, only to be ignored as the spacecraft intends to push the station into deep space. Miranda realizes that Earth has activated Firewall 3, a fail-safe protocol to protect Earth from the creature, and confesses she knew about this protocol before coming aboard the ISS. Sho leaves his pod unbeknownst to the others, believing a rescue ship has arrived. As he grabs a knob to open the hatch, Calvin follows closely behind and decimates the Soyuz crew, who are caught off guard. Afterward, it latches onto Sho, forcing him to sacrifice himself by letting go of Miranda's grasp to get sucked into the Soyuz craft and trap Calvin, only to see the creature return. She and David flee, locking it from the other side. The pair watches, horrified, as the Soyuz detaches from the docking bay and crashes into the station, causing them to fly erratically and slowly descend toward Earth in 39 minutes. Accepting their likely demise, the pair still worries that Calvin may survive re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. David reads Goodnight Moon one last time, while Miranda reminisces about her father. Bracing for the coldness of the interior, they brainstorm a plan to lure Calvin into one of the two lifeboats, both set to a default trajectory. David plans to trap Calvin inside a pod using an oxygen candle, before manually overriding the flight path to avoid re-entry. Meanwhile, Miranda will board the other pod for safety. Despite her hesitations, she accepts David's sacrifice, trusting his decision for her survival. Not long after, the pair suits up and goes their separate ways to enact the plan. David searches for Calvin, who grabs and consumes the oxygen candle. He hurriedly floats away, leading the creature into his pod while it becomes distracted by another oxygen candle. After locking himself in with the beast, he leaves a message for headquarters, alerting them that he will launch into space. Miranda does the same in her pod, recording a black box to warn everyone of Calvin's imminent danger to life on Earth, hoping they will not underestimate its capabilities. David is then attacked by Calvin while frantically steering the ship. Soon after, one of the pods lands in the South Pacific Ocean, catching the attention of two Vietnamese fishermen, who appear stunned by their discovery. Meanwhile, the other pod, carrying Miranda, starts failing and flies wildly into deep space, leaving her fate unknown. The fishermen discover David, enveloped almost completely by Calvin. Believing he is in danger, they force open the hatch door, unaware that the astronaut is warning them to stay away. The movie ends as other boats slowly approach the wreckage, unaware of the horror they will soon face. So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more videos.